Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric and Matt, and this is Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit, your beacon of freedom and the American way of life. Tune in every Friday for a new episode as we dive into the world of liberty and what makes our country great. All right, guys, welcome back. Matt and Eric here with Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit. I hope everybody's had a fantastic week. How's it going?
Very, very tired, but we're going to get through this one.
We're going to get through it. Well, I tell you, America is tired of all the crap that's going on with gun control.
That was a good segue. I like it.
The question that we want to pose today in our podcast is this war on gun control over? Is it a lost battle? Have we won the war on gun rights, right? Is the prospect of gun control a lost war? I mean, that's something we always refer to, and we're going to kind of dive into the cultural, political, economic climate, everything, the social climate that surrounds gun control, and talk about how things have changed so much over the last couple of decades. We're going to talk about constitutional carry and dive into a lot of different subjects. We're probably telling some people a lot of things they already know, but I know that we have a lot of listeners that are probably coming from many different walks of life. So we want to kind of present all this information in a way that hopefully will make it make sense, and possibly, if people will listen, some folks on the other side of the aisle that may not really agree with gun owners or don't understand the culture of gun ownership, we want to really try to make them understand where we're all coming from if they're willing to listen, so they can really understand that gun ownership is about unity and freedom and unity of ideas, and whereby, yes, we can all have maybe different ways that we approach certain problems or approach our societal and cultural differences. At the end of the day, gun ownership is a very important cornerstone to a holistically free and happy and safe society. And I think that we'll be able to lay those facts out here. And I'd like to thank our friends at Ballistic Inc. for supporting today's podcast, which is kind of weird that I say Ballistic Inc. because Matt's sitting right here in front of me, the owner.
Yes.
But big thanks to Ballistic Inc. for supporting today's podcast. Go over and check out some of their awesome t-shirts. Get yourself a snazzy new shirt and support all your favorite content creators all in one fell swoop. Check them out, ballisticinc.com, and go pick yourself up a snazzy new t-shirt.
Yes, get you some new threads.
New threads, yes. All right. So we're going to dive into this subject a little bit, and the idea and the concept of gun ownership in the United States over all these years, it's been a storied and sometimes troubled and sometimes difficult road. But I do feel like this road has some light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, don't you think that culture is really changing a lot with gun owners?
Absolutely. You're starting to, I would say probably prior to the 80s, like in the early to mid 80s, it was almost like taboo to think that everybody would be carrying firearms. Not only that, but just the concealed carry permit process in the 80s was very, very strict across the entire United States. And then things started to change. And I think that was the realization that during that time, like the 80s and 90s, that's when everybody, not just the government, started to see the whole restrictive process of permits was only hurting the law-abiding citizen. Because at that time, if you go back and look, there's a really neat GIF map that shows the progress of constitutional carry, but it kind of goes through which states had shall issue, may issue, and in the 80s there was no issue. It was like everything is red, and at that time is when they started to see that bad guys will always get guns, even back in the 80s. And if everybody doesn't have the ability to defend themselves, that's when you start to see a lot of issues. And then you start seeing permits being issued, because I don't know what happened, but the government at that time realized, all right, we need to get our citizenry armed so they can defend themselves for, using the Second Amendment. And that's when you started to see this boost in concealed carry permits and firearms. And then you started to see the entire firearms lifestyle kind of emerge.
Sure. I think that it's important to recognize the distinction that, like in the late 70s, early 80s, getting into the mid 80s, there was this huge movement for like what they would call, like today they call it preppers now is the word they use. But back then it was more like survivalists.
Yeah. And
the way they were kind of thinking is, it's not that much different than the way that particular arrangement is approached today in terms of preppers or survivalists or homesteaders. Homesteaders is a real popular term now.
Yes.
But back in the 80s, they were called, survivalists, right? And they were worried about governmental collapse or race war, and that was a real big thing. Like in the 80s, everybody was worried about a race war and everything like that. But anyway, I digress. The point is that this culture of readiness and being a survivor and being self-sufficient and all of that, guns were a cornerstone for that. I mean, obviously, you can't be prepared for anything if you don't have the way to protect, everything that you've tried to build to be self-sufficient. And honestly, to also protect yourself, your person, your family, your community, what have you, right? So with that movement did come, definitely a change in culture to push more people to become gun owners. And of course, the government, when it comes to policy, policy and laws are always going to be downstream of culture and downstream of, people's views and everything. So with that huge surge in people just becoming not only gun enthusiasts, but owning guns for the purposes of, having a much more, let's just say, holistic duty that they feel to their communities and each other and their families and just to themselves to be self-sufficient. Of course, laws have to change in order to accommodate people's whims and wishes and needs, right? And I hate to say it, but the way that our country is set up is not perfect, but the system we have, when it is oiled correctly and running correctly and ran by honorable people, is not a terrible system in all of itself. When the people running the show are good people that kind of have a holistic view that matches the bulk of the views of your general populace. So I think that's where you started to see it like that. And that particular map that you're talking about is interesting. Georgia just became the 25th state to have constitutional carry. Now, we're not going to spend a ton of time talking about constitutional carry because Matt and I did an entire episode on constitutional carry that's an hour long.
Yep, a couple weeks ago.
And there was a gun gripe that Dudley Brown and I from NAGR filmed together talking about the future of constitutional carry. So it's probably not worth beating the dead horse of constitutional carry, but only in that we'll say that half the country now has constitutional carry. So if that tells you anything, just in the amount of constitutional carry states that there are now versus what they were even just a decade ago, it's grown by leaps and bounds. Now, who could number 26 be?
Florida.
We're hoping Florida.
Yep.
Now, that is currently going on now. Ron DeSantis has shown a lot of interest in trying to get constitutional carry passed in Florida. Of course, there are a lot of Florida state rhinos that are trying to prevent it. And maybe if they're not preventing it, they're not helping either, which is sort of the same thing, I suppose.
Well, I think a couple of podcasts and a different subject brought that up about, why Florida is so unique in their stances with rhinos and what causes their legislator to vote the way they do, because they have a very interesting dynamic of citizenry that live there.
That's right.
But we go back and listen to some old episodes.
Florida's a different vibe.
We definitely touched on that. It's interesting that there's 25 states currently. There hopefully 26. I know Alabama, a couple of other states surrounding us are putting up their dockets for concealed carry as well, or constitutional carry. I think a lot of things happened in the mid to late 80s and 90s that kind of caused that uptick in the ability or the wanting to defend oneself. There's a lot of civil unrest, and that was all based on inequality, which is a real thing. If you start looking at stuff like in the 80s, 90s, the Rodney King, the LA roof Koreans, like all that stuff, that was all legitimate things that took place. You cannot,
Waco, Ruby Ridge,
exactly. Those are all things that woke up the American people that said, "Oh my God, I need a way to defend myself and my family." And it also showed just how heavy the boot is when they want to step on you. If they want to step on your throat, they're going to put their boot on your throat. And I strongly believe to this day, the only reason that the Republic has lasted as long as it has is because of the Second Amendment.
Oh, without question.
100%. Can you imagine if they just never issued permits and they made it increasingly harder to defend yourself by purchasing a firearm? We would all be under a boot right now, without a doubt.
When you look at events like Waco, Ruby Ridge, and yeah, it seems like there was almost this kind of tiny renaissance that happened, a negative renaissance. I guess there would be a word for that, right? A cataclysm, right? So there's like this cataclysm of events that occurred in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was a really terrible thing where you had the ATF being weaponized against people, and maybe there was a lot of people that were kind of indifferent about guns, right? Okay, so in the 80s, you had the whole survivalist movement, and sure, that picked up a certain amount of steam and changed the culture a bit, and you had a certain amount of people that were kind of going, wow, maybe these survivalists are right. And again, just like it is today, to this day, there's a certain amount of people that might have been like, well, you know what? I don't think that, there's going to be a race war. I don't think there's going to be some crazy government action or something going on. But you know what? One thing I can agree with these survivalists, and we're talking, mid-80s in that era, maybe they are right that we should be prepared. It's probably a good idea to have a firearm to be able to defend yourself, protect yourself. And remember where we were culturally in that time, too, in the 80s. I mean, think about it. You had a lot of people that had come back from Vietnam, right? A lot of the veterans from Vietnam were not that old at that point. So you had people that had experience in the bush, fighting in a war, had seen some terrible things in the war, and they were coming back, and they didn't want to see their world turn into something as crazy as the chaos of Vietnam. And some of these people had demons that followed them to the grave and continue to, the ones that are still around from the Vietnam War. So you had all these Vietnam War veterans that were coming back and really preaching the aspect of self-sufficiency. They saw how fast society could collapse. I mean, look at the fall of Saigon, how volatile and scary that situation likely was. And you had people who lived through that and didn't want to see the U.S. fall into a situation where people were not ready for some collapse, that whether or not that collapse was theoretical, could or could not happen, if the potential was there for it, they wanted to avoid that. So again, getting into the 90s, I think it woke up a lot of people when they saw what happened at Waco. Now, there are a lot of varying opinions about what happened at Waco and the way that it happened and the events that transpired. And obviously, if you don't know, the Branch Davidians were burned up in their compound, if you will. And that was between February 28th, 1993, April 19th, 1993. And it ended up, it was a siege. And it ended up with the Branch Davidians and all of their women, children, everybody getting burned up in the structure they lived in by a combined effort of FBI. I mean, all your alphabet agencies. There's people from all various different types of law enforcement. Yeah. I think some either FBI. I think some FBI. Was it FBI or ATF that got shot on the roof? I think
a little mixture of both. Probably.
I think a mixture of alphabet agency fellows got shot at Waco. Look, here's the thing. No matter what you feel about what happened with like Ruby Ridge, Waco, sometimes the devil is in the details, but sometimes the devil is in the outcome, right? Like if a war happens and then a war is over, okay, you pick up the pieces and you move on. And as terrible as the events may be, all right, how do you reconcile those things? The way the American people reconciled it is by going, you know what? Maybe these people aren't very trustworthy. I mean, come on. It's easy to say that, well, you weren't there, or you're just playing Monday quarterback. You weren't alive. Don't worry about it. There's all these people that'll say, well, it was a complicated op, and you don't know what you're talking about and everything. So look, no matter, yes, there were some bad tactics employed. Maybe there was some bad leadership. Janet Reno was probably off her meds. There's no telling. I mean, there's the Clintons. I mean, look, there's all kind of crazy stuff going on. But the point is, though, is that no matter the tactics, the outcome, the death, the chaos, the news coverage, no matter what, that die was cast, and that die, it literally landed on the majority of Americans going, or at least a huge subset of Americans going, maybe we need to arm ourselves.
Well, if you look at it, so that was what kind of opened everybody's eyes to the gross overreach of the government in modern times. And I say modern, even though it was quite some time ago. It was really the first time that it had been broadcast or publicized through national media. And you're saying, wow, the gross overreach of the government is pretty heinous. Now, if you take a step back, to 1920, almost the same thing happened in Tulsa with the Tulsa Race Massacre, where you see another gross overreach of the government. The difference is this is pre-media, so there was no mass media, there was no, information being, it was quite some time ago. And again, gross overreach, deputized individuals went in and they literally burned this town to the ground. Now, I don't
under government order.
Under government order with the, help of the government.
That's where they firebombed the city?
Yeah, they burned the city down. They killed the people.
They literally firebombed.
Yeah,
city.
They flew over with planes and they dropped like kerosene bombs on the buildings, firebomb. Men, women, children. It was absolutely heinous. And there's a track record of this with the government. So that's why I strongly believe that the only reason that we're able to be where we're at right now is the Second Amendment, because right now, as we speak, we have a way to push back and say, hey, you can't do that. And you know what? It hasn't really happened since. Not to my knowledge. Not at the level that it happened with Waco or Ruby Ridge or even, the Tulsa Race Massacre. Mm-hmm. It just really hasn't happened at that level.
So to give you an idea of dates and to give you a time hack, so Waco was in 93, Ruby Ridge was a year earlier in 1992. So if you're not familiar with the Ruby Ridge standoff, basically Vicki Weaver, look, this is a terrible thing to talk about. You need to research it. I don't want to go into it because it's such a terrible thing that happened, right? Randy Weaver had basically gotten pegged by some feds for chopping some shotgun barrels down a little bit too short that they were supposed to be. So this was all over a shotgun barrel that was a little bit too short. And I don't even think it got cut down like a super tiny amount. Like it was just like an inch and a half below what it was supposed to be. And I think some feds trying to entrap Mr. Weaver is what this wound up happening. And of course there was a standoff and some snipers from a HRT team shot the dog, one of the kids, and Mrs. Weaver. And
the baby.
And the baby died too?
I believe so. I'm not 100% sure.
Oh my God. Well, at the end of the day, what happened...
Or she was holding the baby.
She was holding the baby.
She was holding the baby.
She was holding the baby. And that's terrible. And they wound up settling with Mr. Weaver and the Weaver family for... I don't know if they ever disclosed the settlement. The Weavers won a combined out-of-court settlement in August of 1995 for $3.1 million. After numerous appeals, Harris was awarded a $380,000 settlement in April of 2000. So, yeah, they were paid, but is that going to bring your wife back and your kid and your dog? No, it's not. But what Ruby Ridge proved was the length that they're willing to go to over something as trivial as the length of a shotgun barrel. So, between this and with Waco, some of the things. Now, I'm not going to get into a ton of detail because we don't have time to go into every little thing. But part of the allegations related to Waco were weapons charges. Like they accused the Branch Davidians of having, let's just say full auto or modified guns that had been illegally modified. And that was part of the reasoning, like explosives, grenades. And of course, there was some allegations of sexual abuse with children and stuff, which you're not going to get into. Because here's the thing, they never got their day in court. They got their day in a hole on fire.
And that's not what the ATF handles anyways.
Right.
Alcohol, tobacco, firearms.
At the end of the day, though, look, it's terrible. And what we want to kind of push home is the fact that there have been many, many transgressions that the government's made against its civilians that sort of solidify why the Second Amendment is here, right? I mean, the Tulsa riots in 1920, that's a great, awesome thing to look at to give you an idea of how important it is to be armed, right? You look at the Trail of Tears, you look at Wounded Knee Massacre.
Even closer, the Rodney King beating in LA, which sparked the entire LA riot, which spawned the Roof Korean, meme.
That was 1997?
Yeah, it was the mid-90s.
Let's see. Let's look it up.
But
LA riots.
Those are things where when you say, like, you hear the word inequality thrown around now today.
92.
Yeah, 92.
So it was the same year as Ruby Ridge.
Yeah, so you
that's
see
a
all
volatile
this stuff,
time. There's a lot of things going on in that couple of years there. It's like, the system was what they were attempting to weaponize against the people in a way. Like, you can't help but get that vibe.
Yep.
Those events are too intertwined and too closely, let's just say, chronologically, for them to not be somewhat related as a campaign. And even if it's just the way that people approached it and viewed it, you can't unsee it once you look at it in that way. I mean, I hate to get all aliens. Like the guy from Aliens, look, my hair. But, it's like...
that was...
It's true.
When you look at it, it's hard not to see why that outcome happened. When you look at the video and you're like, yo, them dudes are just beating that dude. Like, plain as day. And then to see not guilty, like, okay, I get that. Like, those dudes were very upset.
Of course.
And I mean... when you start looking at that, the culmination of all of these things happening in the same time period, everybody said, we need guns and we need to be able to protect ourselves and our families. Now, on top of that, you also had the influx of like drugs coming in. You had like in Florida, Miami, you had huge amounts of cocaine coming in from the government. You had the crack cocaine epidemic happening on the West Coast in LA. Again, proven government. So, I mean, look at what's going on. So you have all the boots coming down on top of you for, firearms. You have the boots funding the drugs coming into the U.S.
To divide
culture. Yes. And look what they're doing right now. And we're going to jump back into the subject, but on the division aspect, look what happened in Georgia. So Kemp signed the constitutional carry bill, and immediately the Stacey Abrams, who's running against him, said, we're going to repeal constitutional carry if I get in office. So how is that not divisive? You're already staking that, hey, this guy gave constitutional carry. If you vote for me, I'm going to repeal it. That's like division at its finest. Like, you're literally trying to split down the middle and garner votes based off of that.
Well, if the pendulum swings every 8 years in either direction, and if every time that pendulum swings, a few of your rights and a few of your liberties kind of fall off the wayside, then after a while, don't you just want to stop the pendulum? And that's kind of where a lot of people are at. They're tired of this divisive rhetoric. And before we get into that subject, I want to read something here that I saw about the Roof Koreans in the LA riots, okay? During the riots, Korean Americans received very little aid or protection from police authorities. Due to their low social status and language barriers, many Koreans rushed to Koreatown after Korea language radio stations called for volunteers to guard against rioters. Many were armed with a variety of improvised weapons, handguns, shotguns, and semi-automatic rifles. It's also worth noting that in South Korea, they have compulsory military service, so all of these young men had likely gotten training, so...
They were all older, they had all done their... Because in Korea... it's 3 years mandatory service, or at least it was 3 years. I'm not sure if they changed it, but all the older folks, like I'm half Korean. My stepdad's Korean, so he served as a tanker when he was in the Korean Army. But all of the older guys, if you ask them, like they're all familiar with weapons. They can pick it up, they can use it. They're not afraid of it. So, it's just very interesting to see how they came to take up arms to help their fellow countrymen, because it was all about protecting the businesses, because all the cops were in Beverly Hills at the time, protecting Beverly Hills, and that's why they didn't come into Koreatown.
Listen to this data point. All right. So in the aftermath, about 2,300 Korean-owned stores in Southern California were looted and burned, making up 45% of all damages caused by the riot. According to the Asian and Pacific American Counseling and Prevention Center, 730 Koreans were treated for post-traumatic stress disorder, which includes insomnia and a sense of helplessness and muscle pain. In reaction, many Korean Americans worked to create political and social empowerment. So this defined an era for like American Korean. I mean, like they literally define themselves in this moment. And when these terrible things occur in our events in history, right? Whether it's the Rodney King riots, whether it's Waco, whether it's Ruby Ridge, whether it's Bundy Ranch, which is we'll get to that in a minute. But these things seek to bring us together and unite us, right? And these are things that some people within the political sphere are very scared of people getting together. They want to create division. They want to create all this rhetoric. They want to divide people because divided people are easier to control. If people are divided over petty little things and they argue about every little stupid thing, well, you're doing the work for them. They don't have to control you. You're controlling yourself because you're hyper-focused on this trivial little thing that, sure, you might have strong feelings on a given subject, but it doesn't mean that that defines you. But they're forcing you, like kind of making you be a moth to a flame, and they're making you think that it's something you need to be paying attention to. And because the way the media has just really indoctrinated people and made people hyper-focus on these things, it can be very difficult to overcome as a society. If you're told the same lie over and over and over again, it starts to become the truth.
It's very true. And I think that's the main point, is that they aim to divide everybody so it's easier to control each individual faction. Because then at a certain point, the groups that are divided break off and create even more groups. So you have groups inside of groups. So you might see some guy, and you see that with the firearms community. You have like what we call FUDs. FUDs are, you always hear it, and they say, I'm pro two-way, but... So, and that's almost like a group within itself. So you have that, they would consider themselves, pro two-way, but those that other, two-way advocates are like, no, they're not. So, and that's what you see across the board, even with the political spectrum. They start breaking off into individual, I guess, ticket items. So if you're like, oh, well, Stacey Abrams might say, well, I'm going to repeal, constitutional carry. She's solely aiming at the one specific one ticket voter. There might be, Democrats out there that only vote for one item on a ticket. That might be it. So she's appeasing that. And then she's going to go and do something else and appease a different group of voters. And you see that across the board on all the political spectrum. So what does that do? That creates another circle back quote for the next governor. The next governor will say, well, I'm going to reinstate. And it just becomes this loop of bargaining with your political rights or your constitutional rights. And they're using it and they're dangling it in front of you. And you're just openly taking it.
I think that there are some cultural differences that are generational as well. So when we look at, I know we throw around the term FUD all the time, and I get it. It is frustrating because you think that, all right, if someone is a gun owner, then they should just be okay with any type of gun that anybody wants to have, and it should be okay, right? Like Second Amendment is the Second Amendment, right? If it's legal and you can have it, well, then why should you have a problem with it? But there are a group of people out there that feel that civilians should only have just hunting rifles and single-shot shotguns and basic revolvers and not have access to anything beyond that. But to be fair, their view is, well, they've never needed it, or maybe they grew up in a rural area in the middle of nowhere and raised by their grandparents, and all they've ever done is, dispatch cattle on the farm or, deer hunt and fish and live off the land. So it's a generational difference. It's not necessarily that they have some deep underlying hatred of those particular types of firearms. They just never had much need for them or use for them, or don't feel like they're necessary. But I don't want this to sound the wrong way, and I don't mean it in this way, but the bottom line is that generation is, on the way out, if you will. I don't want to make it sound bad. Like I'm not wishing anything on anybody, but the generation's getting a little older, and the time's going to come when they're not going to be around anymore, and you'll still have some people out there that kind of have those views. Sure, it's okay to say that, well, I like the Second Amendment, but I don't want people to have X, Y, Z. It's everybody's right to feel the way they want. Now, I'm like, dude, I'm 110% 2A. I'm like miniguns in everybody's garage, machine guns, suppressors, explosives. Like, I'm all about it. Like, yeah, a tank in every driveway. Like, I have no problem. I'm all for it. I love guns, 110%. Not everybody shares my enthusiasm. However, that's sort of what the vein of this podcast is about today, is that enthusiasm is spreading a lot more than you might think. So to kind of bounce back to what Matt was discussing with Stacey Abrams and this whole, one issue voter paradigm, He's right, okay? But I think that plan is going to start to backfire considerably because you've seen a heck of a lot of things going on in the media, especially with Elon Musk, buying out Twitter, which it's not official yet at this point that we're cutting today's podcast, but there's been quite the change in the way that Twitter's algorithm's been working, and a lot of people have been shadow banned, and it seems like they're escaping a shadow ban, and they're gathering a lot of followers, and there's a lot of people wanting to use the platform. The point is, now that discourse is back on the menu, so to speak, and people can be a little bit more forward and honest with each other without the fear of reprisal from the big tech giants, I think you're seeing a large cultural change that's occurring at that level as well. Informational warfare and the controlling of the narrative is very much in the forefront of these people's minds. I mean, look at this ministry of truth. I know that's a word that keeps getting thrown around, but it's true. The government literally adopted a Bureau of Propaganda specifically to deal with the Musk takeover because they know that controlling information is a very important way for them to control the narrative, if you will, on how people should think. And there are a large group of people in our society that do not have the capability or the willingness to think for themselves and to think objectively and to be fair and to operate in normal discourse, right? So, yes, Stacey Abrams' old, antiquated Democrat talking point of, well, I'm going to repeal constitutional carry if I'm elected governor, that doesn't hold the same water it did 2 decades ago. Because I think that there's a heck of a lot of people on their side of the equation that have gotten into guns as well. I mean, I was going to talk a little bit about Bundy Ranch that happened in 2014, but honestly, that's a blip on the radar in terms of events. You fast forward to all the BLM riots and Antifa riots and people burning down police stations and flipping cars and damaging property and setting up their autonomous zones and all this random stuff, which they claim to be protesting. Look, whatever. Okay, at the end of the day, no matter what it's called, no matter what language you call it, the bottom line is, again, remember what we said earlier? It doesn't matter the manner in which a war is fought. It doesn't matter the tactics in which were used in the war to conduct the war. It doesn't, and honestly, sometimes it doesn't even matter what the outcome of the conflict is. What matters is the change of perspective, right? That you will never escape. So just like in 92, 93, when all this government overreach was occurring that got people to kind of think a little bit hardcore about guns more so than they did before, all these riots and stuff, you have people on both sides of the equation that went, all right, now it's the opposite. Instead of the government putting their boot down and hurting people directly, if they just stay out of the way and do nothing. Oh, well, wait a minute. Now that you mean they're not protecting us, or that they're not beholden to protect us, or now that society is screaming to defund these people? I'm not saying you have to be pro-police or anti-police, but you're pro-you, right? You want to live at the end of the day. So it actually backfired on them. So you end up having a lot of people on the left side of the equation, Democrats, as well as plenty of Republicans. They're like, you know what? No one's going to protect me. I have to buy a gun and protect myself. So that whole antiquated, argument of, well, I'm going to, go into an anti-gun tirade as a politician and think that that's going to secure that vote. I don't think that holds the same water as it did. And that's probably good for the culture of gun ownership. But isn't that a weird thing to kind of consider?
It is.
Paradigm?
It is. And I think you're right, because what you're seeing is not just here because, honestly, Georgia being, in the Bible Belt, we've always been slow to adopt everything, whether it's selling alcohol on Sundays, whether it's, firearms, like constitutional carry, like cannabis, like all that. We're super, super slow to adopt anything. So this is a step in the right direction, and it is showing that states are recognizing that, because if you start looking at some of the other states, so traditionally you have 25 states that authorize or, pass constitutional carry. And if you look at the crime rates for those 25 states, they're significantly lower than the states that have the most restrictive gun laws in America. Why is that? Ask yourself. 25 states, 50% of America has a lower crime rate than like 4 U.S. cities.
Ask the city of Kennesaw, Georgia, why.
Yeah. I mean, where you're required by law to have a gun.
It's an unwritten thing. Yes. I mean, they don't go around and check and make sure you have a firearm, but the general code is like, yeah, every head of household is required to have a gun. So what is that going to require the thieves to do? They're going to be like, well, it ain't worth, hey, every household I break into in Kennesaw could have a gun pointing at me.
100% chance that they have a gun.
That's right.
You
have to assume.
Yeah.
Right. So why not just go a town over where at least there's the plausible deniability that, maybe there's less armed people in the next town over. So see, that's a smart strategy on the part of Kennesaw.
And if you want to see how heinous...
And it's a college town, by the way.
It is. If you want to see how heinous the human condition can get to on a regular basis, I highly recommend that you follow our friend Mr. Guns and Gear on Instagram, who posts these videos about just how heinous people can be. There's one that happened here in Atlanta. It's a elderly security guard, and he's just opening his car. It's a video, and he's going to work, and a guy just comes up behind him and shoots him in the back of the head for no reason.
That's the one that he just posted the other day.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the
homeless
guy sitting there comes by and takes out of his pockets what the other guy missed and just leaves him there. It's horrible. And that
was in Compton.
No, that was in Atlanta.
Was it?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
So that's right here, home, Atlanta. So no, if you ask me, no, I will not delegate my safety to anybody else but me. But if you ask somebody in New York or Chicago or LA or San Francisco, they don't have that choice. And they also have the highest crime rates because they do not let their citizens protect themselves. Now that might be, someone might say that's okay because the police can do it. But in this particular case, they can't. They might as well not even have a police force. Yeah. So
when your life's in danger, When you're seconds from death, the police are minutes away.
That's right.
And look, that's not a knock on police. I mean, look, at the end of the day, I'm sure there's a ton of police officers out there that when they were little kids, they dreamt of themselves putting on a uniform and saving the day and rescuing the damsel in distress or killing the robber or doing whatever, right? Like I'm probably in their head, they have this notion of what they're trying to accomplish in society and this view of how they want society to see them. And yes, that is an honorable thing for some who approach it from that manner of truly wanting to do the best for the people in their community and put their lives at stake to help others. There are people that selflessly put themselves on the line in order for what they view as the greater good. However, we know that in reality, not everybody carries a policeman in the back of their pocket. I mean, that's just the reality. Like they're going to draw a line around your corpse and go, well, this sucks, but here it is. You don't want to be in that situation. And most forward-thinking and really level-headed, good-going, cops, especially our sheriff here that I've talked to, have said, yeah, we want citizens armed, right? Yes, we want people armed because we want you to be able to respond to a threat as you see fit and use your due diligence, use your good judgment, and that builds a rapport between the law enforcement community and the civilians in a way that is positive. Now, there are people on various sides of the coin that absolutely 110% hate the police no matter what. The police could never do any right by them. They're only jackboot thugs and everything. And don't get me wrong, I understand. There is a perception, and I have my days where I go back and forth on that fence. Like, depending on what is going on in society, you have to react to certain things as they happen, and you have to eventually choose a side and make a decision, right? There are no absolutes. Right? Sometimes absolutes can be a very difficult thing to deal in, especially when it's something as culturally a mixing pot as the United States, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you can throw all these cultures in a giant mixing pot. You can stir them up. You can throw some guns in the mix, and you can throw some drugs in the mix, and you can throw some societal issues and behavioral issues and genetic issues. And you can throw all this crap in the mix, and you can mix it up. But at the end of the day, the slurry that comes out in the bottom has to at least taste halfway decent.
That's right.
Right. If it's tasting too foul, you got to change something, right? So there is a huge mixing pot of different ideas and cultures that form how we approach guns in our society. And I think that there are two different types of schools of thought in terms of how these things are approached, right? One side wants to apply the boot of government to deal with every single tiny issue and problem that society may face, and they're perfectly willing to give up every freedom in the process for that to happen for the perceived safety that will result from it. Now, that is obviously not what I agree with. I agree with the individual responsibility of getting out there and doing things in an honorable and just way and using every tool at your disposal to defend yourself, your community, your families, and those around you, and to, do the right thing when the opportunity presents itself, right? And to treat every person as an individual and to treat them with respect until given a reason to do otherwise. There's two very different schools of thought there, and those thought processes are clashing, and that is still present in the culture of gun ownership in this country. But I would like to think that, segueing back to the riots and all the stuff going on and the defund the police movement and all this stuff. So no matter what you think about police and law enforcement and their role in all of this, yes, there's many things that I really hate about the police. There's some things that I can probably agree that we might need them for in our society. Probably not going to line up with the majority of people, but that's okay. The point is, though, at the end of the day, cops, civilians, everyone alike who is at least halfway forward thinking, Matt, are generally going to agree that an armed society is a polite society, and at least that's the first step.
That's right. And I would say that my expectation for police isn't that if you're breaking into my house that I'm going to call you to solve the problem. My expectation is that I'm going to call you after I've solved the problem to clean up the mess. So anybody that thinks that the police are there to protect you would be incorrect. Your first responsibility is to protect yourself, and then they're just there to enforce the law. The law says that you can't break into somebody else's property and rob them. They're going to enforce that by arresting that individual after I've already stopped them or clean up the mess.
Or they've killed you.
Or perhaps that. Or to clean up the mess, and that's and I think that's a reasonable expectation, because there is absolutely no way that you can expect any amount of police officers to get to your house in time to stop whatever is going to happen. It's not possible.
I think my view is, man, look, if I get in a wreck and I'm on the side of the road and my car is a mangled freaking mess of metal, and you have to bring some jaws of life out there and cut me out and save me of my car because I'm unconscious and it's about to set on fire, by all means, come save me.
Yes.
Right? At that point, yeah, we need help. So to say that you don't need civil servant, I hate to use the word servant, but like, you don't need civil employees, right, that can perform tasks like, responding to fire, responding to accidents, litter and aid in terms of your EMTs and AMTs, right? My wife just finished up her EMT. She's going to do her AMT as well, I think, down the road. So it's like, look, there are people out there that want to serve the community in some way, shape, or form, right? They want to try to make the world a better place. It's okay to acknowledge that that's a positive trait and that's an honorable thing for people to want to do, right? Yes, there are wrecks. You have to clean up. You got to report what happened. You got to figure out what you can do. Yeah, people get hurt. They have to get taken to the hospital. All right. Yeah, people get stolen from. You got to fill out a report and try to see if you can help these people out and recover their property. There are reasons that you need these people in society to have a safe and functional society. So I'm kind of halfway. Like, my toe is halfway in that pool. Like, where I get pissed is people trying to tell me how to live. People trying to tell me what guns to own. People trying to tell me what's good and not good for me, telling me what I can and can't put in my body. The road pirates, they give you tickets and crap. I mean, that drives me nuts, man. Like leave people the hell alone.
Yeah.
Like, they don't want anything to do with that. Like,
road
if
pirates.
someone's hurt,
love it.
I look at it like simple freedom, right? Like, if you're not hurt, if there's no victim, what does this interaction have to do with if I have not hurt a person who is sitting there pointing the finger at me saying, you hurt me?
Right. And that's the first step.
And that's where a lot of freedom-minded people just, they kind of get off the bus there. They're like, dude, just stop, man. Like, that's cringe, man.
Well, what you're describing is the first step of fascism, like real fascism, because it always starts with, well, nobody should have a 30-round magazine. Why? Because nobody should have one. Mm-hmm. Nobody should have that much money. Nobody should be that wealthy.
Yeah.
Why?
Oh, we have to regulate cryptocurrencies. Oh, yeah.
Why? So all of these things might seem minuscule, and you might think that, oh, it's just because that's the way they feel, but it's not how they feel. It's their core belief. So if they feel like they have the right to dictate what you can and can't have because nobody should have it, and that's the only reason, then that's just how they feel about everything. Nobody should have a Mercedes. Everybody should drive a Toyota Camry or Corolla. Nobody should have a nice house. They should all live in like communal housing. Well, that's just the way it is.
You're going to eat your bug guts and be happy. You're going to own nothing and be happy.
Exactly. We all need to line up at the soup kitchen every day at 12 for the free food. It doesn't work. And
so, all right, let's segue back to gun ownership. Now, one thing I want to try to kind of like dial in this particular video, we've kind of talked about, how we've gotten here. In more or less terms, what we've really focused on is the government overreach, some of the terrible things that have happened, the public's response to that and how that actually ends up being, a thing as the rubber meets the road and people start to kind of react to this behavior, because you have action and reaction, right? For every response, every stimulus, there's a response. So if you do something, you have to understand that people are going to react in a certain way, and people would like to think that they can predict, how people are going to respond to certain, stimuli. But at the end of the day, all you can do is just have a look at culture and see what's downstream of those things happening. Like events have a butterfly effect that ripple in time and ripple in history, right? So those ripples are still there. Like the hurt of Waco and Ruby Ridge is still there. Like in some people's minds, right? Obviously, the firebombing in 1920 and like all of these terrible things. You look at the civil rights movements, women's suffrage, prohibition, Trail of Tears, Wounded Knee, all the things that happened with the natives. So all these ripples, now some of the ripples might be small, but some of those ripples are still there. And eventually they upset the balance of the pond in a way that you can't ignore and you cannot escape no matter what you want to do. So the ultimate question, Matt, that I would pose, and I guess we can both answer it in our own way if you'd like, what is the future of gun ownership in our country at the present time where we're at right now? What do you think is the most significant change in culture that has formed what the Second Amendment will mean to people in the next decade? Go.
Before that, I'm going to say, great Confucius say, every tsunami start with ripple in ocean.
It's true.
So all these ripples, they have a tendency to build up and they create what we're seeing now.
That's right.
So the biggest culture change, right? Is that what you asked?
Sure.
What's
Second Amendment culture going to be in 10 years at our current rate? What can we expect?
My personal opinion is that I think we're going to get a lot more wins. I do see, especially with what's going on with the SCOTUS things going on right now. We're starting to see.
Dip our toes in that pool,
well, that's a different podcast.
That's a different color water, if you know what I mean.
But with the way that it's going right now, and that surprised me. It really did surprise me. I think we're going to see a lot more wins. We are going to see a lot more 2A cases because there's quite a few in the docket right now. So as soon as they pick those up, we're going to get a lot more wins. I don't think we're going to have any like NFA items kind of come off. I think that's a little far off. But with the way that it's trending now, you're seeing a lot more of the younger generation come up, and a lot more of the younger generation want really small, compact firearms, and that's where you start getting into the Form 1 suppressors, SBRs, SBSs. I think that's going to be a lot more normal now, and I do see that as being a stepping stone, and I think that's going to be the next low-hanging fruit for the culture, is making it easier for suppressors and SBRs to be normal and common.
That's a great observation. I was going to probably segue more into the territory of mass noncompliance. I feel like the Second Amendment is a prohibition of our times, and I know I've said that many, many times, and I don't mean to prohibit it. I mean the prohibition as I'm discussing the prohibition of alcohol now. And you know how all of that went. People were making illegal liquor, and there was this whole to-do, and they had federal agents busting, illegal speakeasies and all of these sorts of things. And there was this entire cultural war that included, Matt, as you said, even poisoning people. Even after alcohol was made legal again, the feds kept poisoning people to keep them from making their own hooch. And the reason they did that is so that people would have to buy the commercial hooch and pay taxes on it. That's how terrible these people are. They don't care. They will poison you in order to get that ever-loving dollar out of you. And that's what it come down to. They realized that they were losing money of taxation. Businesses weren't paying taxes because they weren't making alcohol. There were stories of many businesses that went to making like sodas and things, you know, and Coca-Colas or whatever you want to call it, you know, soda pops. If I know everybody around the world calls it different stuff.
Soda pop.
And look, in Georgia, anything that's a soda is a Coke.
That's right. It's a Coke.
But up north, they say pop. Look, whatever you call it, they were making sodas and things like that instead of beer, and that didn't quite fare so well. Now they had to do what they could to survive. The point is, though, 2A will go the way of prohibition in terms of the way people react to it. Prohibition went away because people just simply quit caring. They would walk right by a federal agent with a bottle of hooch in their hand and not care. The law enforcement officers were going in the speakeasies at night and getting drunk with their buddies after a hard day. I mean, eventually it just became, okay, well, if 80% of the cops are getting drunk in the speakeasies at night, how can you, by day, go back there and try to mess with these people knowing that, you know, at that point, the cultural war is over. You've lost the war on that, right? Now, we could argue, right, that the war on drugs is over. That's a whole nother podcast. We're going to spend a whole nother hour on that subject. The point is, though, Second Amendment is the prohibition of our time. I truly believe that. I agree with you, Matt, that there are many young people that, yeah, I mean, they play video games and they see popular culture. They look at movies and all types of media, and they see all these cool little gadgets and MP7s and the Fluxerator and, you know, all these just really cool guns. And they want that kind of stuff. I mean, heck, we have the Second Amendment, right? We have the right to bear arms. Why can't I have that gun? So, you know, these kids start to ask these questions. And I say kids, young adults, young men and women, strong people that want to, you know, grow up in society and have every bit of freedom that they can experience in this world, and that they should, and that we should want for them, right? So they start to go, well, I want that. And after a while, as culture changes, and that is a changing culture, right? You remember in the 90s as well, kind of going back, it seemed like, speaking of video games, like when Doom came out and Wolfenstein and some of the early PC games, there was this, you know, of course, all the pearl clutching from all the churches and moms and all this stuff about violent video games, and they, you know, so it was a dirge on society. All this stuff always comes down to the pearl clutchers of society. Alcohol was the pearl clutchers of society, right? The whole video game stuff was the pearl clutchers of society. You know, adding cannabis to Title I, that was during the Nixon administration. That was pearl clutching and blatant racism, if I may use that word. In that particular case, most certainly to go against one very specific group of people in the country. And that's a terrible transgression against freedom, against liberty, and against common sense. But again, more pearl clutching.
Look at the stop and frisk in New York. Like that was targeted racism at that point.
Correct. So when we look at all this pearl clutching goes on in society, 2A is the same way. You know, you've still got a group of pearl clutchers that all they can do, they can't help themselves but try to push for more and more gun control because they are too, you know, misinformed or just ignorant to the facts, right? They do not look at the data. They do not look at the facts and statistics. They don't care who commits the crimes and where and under what leadership and in what areas. If you look at those data points, the bulk of society is not responsible for these crazy things that happen with firearms. And the sooner we confront the cultural issues that cause these things, we can move forward as a society. And I believe that the path forward will be mass noncompliance by the multitude of peaceful people out there that want nothing more than the ability to own the firearms, take care of their people, have cool stuff. Most people just want to go out the range and have fun and blast machine gun. You know, it's not what people think it is at the greater level society. They think that gun owners, you know, are worried about that same sort of mid-'80s survivalist thing. Oh, government collapse or race war. I think the fact of the matter, Matt, that is so far from the truth, is not even funny. I think most people just want to protect themselves, have fun, go to the range, hang out with their kids, have a way to bond with their kids and their spouses and their, you know, fellow people in their community. And it's really just that simple. People just want to protect themselves and be able to stand toe-to-toe with anybody that would hurt them. It's really just that simple. And I think mass noncompliance is going to be the path forward.
I believe,
I'm registering that opinion. Here I am.
I believe you're onto something because it's already somewhat taking place. And we've seen it with the bump stocks, how many people actually turned into bump stocks.
Yeah.
Very few. How many people actually sent in and turned in their high capacity magazines?
Yeah.
No one, whether it's pistols, ARs. I mean, what is it? California had to walk back on their ban like on a certain time. They allowed them for like 2 weeks, and then they're like, oh God, we gotta ban this again. But everybody that bought them within those 2 weeks, you're good. All you have to do is prove. So you're starting to see a lot of non-compliance already happening. And, it's just like prohibition. If you go to the gun range in California, the cops they're going to look at it. They see everybody having it. They don't have enough handcuffs to lock everybody up. It's just not going to work.
That's right.
Now, as far as, everybody wanting to like worried about machine guns and all that stuff, it's a lot of, just they don't understand how much it costs to run a machine gun. So the pearl clutchers are like, Johnny's going to go out there and blast machine guns all day. Like, no, $500 in about 45 seconds and you're done for the day. All right. Because, you run a belted machine gun for about a minute, that you'll run a $500 belt through that thing easily. And I don't know about you, Eric. I don't know too many people that are going to stay there all day running a belt fed. It just doesn't work financially.
Machine guns can be, in some cases, impractical, and they are expensive to feed. But I love them.
Oh,
I'm all about it.
Without a doubt.
So we're going to end today's podcast on a few notes. And one thing I would like to just sort of provide is maybe a little bit of hope for the future. And I'll provide these words, and you tell me what you think, or if you agree, or if you don't, or whatever. But
Eric's words of wisdom.
The culture of the Second Amendment is a very rapidly changing environment, but it's also a very diverse environment. And I know diversity gets thrown around in a way that is used as a political coin by many people. Many political pundits, many politicians throw around this diversity and inclusion in a very well-groomed political statement. But my statement is not political. My statement is based on reality and observation. I'm not trying to earn a vote. I'm trying to earn respect, and I care much more about people's respect. But the Second Amendment community is a very inclusive group of people, and is a very diverse group of people. There are so many people from many different walks of life owning firearms, and I think it's awesome, right? Everybody, no matter how poor or rich, black or white, no matter what color you are, no matter what religion you are, no matter what sexual orientation you are, if you're heavy, if you're skinny, doesn't matter, right? The Second Amendment does not care about those things. Our rights do not come from those divisions. Our rights do not come from people, right? Our rights we're born with. And without getting on the soapbox, the point is the culture of the Second Amendment is changing in such a way that I think moving forward, if we can just concentrate on unity and concentrate on not allowing them to divide us over this bullcrap, and then we're going to move forward in a really, really powerful way. And I don't think it'll take very long. It takes a long time to erode something. But to build it back up, once that unity is established, I think there's a solid chance. Maybe in my lifetime, we'll see it. Who knows?
Very well said. Very well said.
Yeah, man. So I think that's going to conclude today's video, man. I know we kind of went along, several different areas. You got any last words not last words, but you got anything else to add?
No, I think that we covered a lot. I think we were very fair. I think we covered a wide gamut of different scenarios, and that helps explain how we got to where we're at right now. And I think that we painted a very good picture for the future of where we're going as a gun community.
Yeah, I think it's important for the people that don't agree with us, too, to understand where we come from. And things like this are important. Discourse is important. Speech is important. Sharing your ideas is important. As long as people are willing to engage in discourse and have a chat, an honest chat about things that are going on, you can come to a conclusion. You can come to an understanding of what everybody's trying to, the reasoning that people are trying to accomplish the goals that they are. And not to parrot just the narratives that are shoved down your throat on all of social media and mainstream media and everything like that. So I think it's important to be an individual, to be a free thinker, to think objectively, to be independent. Those are very important things moving forward. Do not parrot the information that's given to you. Just do your research. Take your time. Reach down inside yourself and ask yourself, does this feel right? If you just remove all of that bias and rhetoric from your life, all the noise, and just look at the facts and look at what you see in front of you, I think the answer would be quite clear for many people. So I think we're at that point.
Absolutely.
Guys, have a great week. Thanks for tuning in. That's been our LLP episode for the day. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And don't forget, go over to Ballistic Inc. and pick yourself up an awesome new t-shirt. That's one way that you can support our efforts here on LLP. We try to post every week. Make sure you go on all of the different podcast servers and leave us a great review. That would help us show up in the search results. Also, over on Iraq Veteran 8888, our YouTube channel, you can find this podcast in video form. We post every Saturday. Usually, sometimes we skip a week or so if we have to take a break. But generally, almost every Saturday, we try to put up an LLP episode over on IV 8888. Have a good one. Many more on the way. Have a great week. We'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Life, Liberty, and Pursuit. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else podcasts are found. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd really appreciate that. You can support us over on Ballistic Inc. by picking yourself up some merch. And remember, guys, danger is freedom. Have a good one.